Hello, everyone, and welcome to Get Those Cryptos. I'm Austin Patry, and I'm here with Mason Nystrom. I'm in Dallas, Texas. He's in Hong Kong. And here we like to talk all things cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. We like to simplify things and just really explain how these things can affect our daily lives. So it is absolutely going to affect your daily life. So make sure to subscribe to this channel and like this video and get on board so that you can be ahead of the game when it comes to crypto and blockchain technology. Today, we are going to be talking about EOS versus Ethereum. EOS is now the number 5. It just overtook Litecoin as one of the biggest cryptocurrencies. And so we're going to evaluate, is EOS the Ethereum killer, as it is often titled? So we're going to be talking about the consensus protocols between EOS and Ethereum, the securities, and more specifically, the fees that go along with that, real world use cases, which is huge in cryptocurrencies, scalability, the leadership, regulation, and finally, we'll answer the question of, can Ethereum and EOS coexist? So without further ado, let's get started. Mason, what's going on?
I'm doing well, man. Happy to be on the show.
Sweet. So I know you're a big fan of EOS. You told me about it when we started kind of reconnecting and talking again months and months ago. So I've always had it on my radar, and I've started to do more research on it, and it is really cool project. But I've always been a huge fan of Ethereum. So kind of going back and forth, I'm happy to have this talk. So first off, let's talk about the consensus protocol. So with Ethereum, they use proof of work similar to a Bitcoin, and there's mining involved. And because of that, there's about 15 transactions per second on Ethereum, and it kind of hurts its scalability, and we'll go more into scalability later. But they're trying to transition to a system called proof of stake, which will help a lot. But how is EOS different, Mason? What kind of consensus do they use?
Yeah, so EOS uses a delegated proof of stake or DPoS system, and it's a little different in the sense that it utilizes proof of stake, so meaning people have to stake some sort of EOS or Ether in order to vote. But delegated proof of stake is slightly different in EOS case, so they'll have 21 essentially delegators, or block producers is what they're calling them, versus in Ethereum, anyone can be a delegator, anyone can be a block validator. Whether that works out in practice is different, but that's what their general aim is.
So you're saying how many people for EOS can be one of these delegators? Did you say there's a specific number, or can the community ultimately decide how many?
So yeah, so there's 21 block producers. And, these aren't just like 21 necessarily like individuals. Like the cost to be a block producer has been estimated at like $1 million, potentially more. So, it's going to be more like a data center than really just any individual doing this outside of, their house or anything like that. So, with EOS, it's definitely more centralized than Ethereum. In practice, we'll see, because right now, if you look at Ethereum, they have 3 or 4 main validators that control pretty much, upwards of probably 50% of the mining and voting power. As they transition to proof of stake, that could change, especially because the proof of stake model that Ethereum can use is called Casper. So it's a little different, and it has like a slashing mechanism. So basically like disincentivizes people who act, maliciously in the environment, versus in EOS, every token holder will have a vote. So you, myself, we can vote on who we want the block producers to be. And the voting will be proportional to the amount of tokens that you hold, which is also a subject that is highly debated as well.
So you said it cost $1 million to become one of these big players with EOS, who has a big opinion and say. I mean, could a company come in and say, yeah, we want to be one of these delegators, we want to be one of the top players with EOS, and a big company can come in and put in couple $1 million behind it, then like you said, it can be really centralized after that.
Yeah, so you already have major mining companies that are trying to be, block producers, and then you also have exchanges that are looking into being block producers too, because they will hold a significant portion of EOS tokens just for trading purposes. So, I mean, there becomes a fine line there, and there also becomes a fine line of where the producers are. So ideally, you'd want, probably no less than maybe 2 to 3 producers in any given country, less depending on the actual country. But if you look at, you can check all the candidates for block producers, and I think it's the most are in China and the US. So, hopefully the community will vote in a way that really spreads out those block producers. But if not, then that could also potentially be a problem.
And so if someone does get too much power, but everyone has the option to vote, they can potentially take down one of these people and say, look, we have too many people in China. It's becoming a little bit too centralized. We're going to use our vote in order to put someone into that place that is in another location. That's a possibility with EOS?
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea is that there will be 21 block producers, and that at any given time, if you didn't like a block producer, you could vote them out. And so with EOS, there will be a lot of different block producers that will want to become block producers. So for example, there will be 21 actual block producers at any given time. And then there will hopefully be, maybe 50 to 100 other block producers that are in line wanting to become main block producers, which will be highly, highly profitable, more so than being a secondary block producer. And so that will incentivize not only the block producers to act well, but also incentivize, block producers that aren't in that 21 to look at ones that aren't doing things right, so that they can then vote them out. And then with EOS, say I'm not that interested in, actually voting, I can essentially vote by proxy. So I could give my vote to you, or I could give my vote to someone else or an entity, and they could vote on my behalf.
So how do these people get some of these profits? If someone puts up $1 million and becomes one of the delegators, someone who's kind of has a big say, is it coming from transaction fees where they're awarded these profits, or is it part of the whole stake model where people are staking their coins and there's like a fee every month, or how does that work?
Yeah, so the EOS system isn't designed to have transaction fees. It's designed to not have any, as compared to Ethereum that does have transaction fees or gas costs. So with EOS, they pretty much, supplement the block producers through inflation. So there's a 5% inflation that's built into the system, and the token holders can vote on, to increase or decrease that amount. But so that's essentially how the miners will, be funded. That's where they will see a lot of their value come from.
And with that inflation, do they have more coins coming into the space that are just kind of created, or is it just already, like you said, it's already worked out and they've just incorporated it into the total supply?
No, I believe that they'll introduce, say it's 5% more tokens into the market each year. And then, say the token holders could say, okay, we want the holders, like the block producers, the block producers to get like 3% of that inflation, and then 2% could be voted to go towards something else, such as a hackathon or, something for like charity or another type of, different thing like that. But we'll see what actually happens.
Okay. And just from Ethereum's standpoint, they're going to be, we'll talk about this when we talk about scalability, but there's going to be a lot of potential upgrades. But just how difficult is it for Ethereum to change after they're so far down the line with so many different dApps associated with it and people using it?
Ethereum has a larger network, obviously. EOS is just a glorified test net right now, and it's launching in June. So we don't really know what the actual product will look like, although they have, the white paper. Dan Larimer, who's the person in charge, the CTO of EOS and Block One, the company that is running that, they've shown some basic like transactions per second, stuff like that they think EOS will be able to do, because they're really focused on scalability. Whereas if you look at Ethereum, they're more focused on decentralization and ensuring that, you don't have, that you have as least centralization and as least censorship as possible.
And so from a security standpoint, with Ethereum, there's a bunch of fees. I mean, not a ton, but there's gas with Ethereum. And what gas is it's just a fee that is associated when you do a transaction with Ether or with a smart contract. And it's because there's a limit to the number of transactions that can be included in a block. And thus, if there can potentially be a malicious individual who wanted the network to fail, and so they could make a lot of transactions between their own wallets without losing any money, and they can max out the transactions in Ethereum so that no one else could use the blockchain, which, I mean, it would be difficult to tell what's real and what's not on the blockchain in that case. But with these transaction fees, miners have an incentive with Ethereum, miners have an incentive to prioritize certain transactions, as they'll make more money if they choose to do higher, because they can choose higher transactions with higher fees, so that they'll get rewarded more. So you can pay more, I can pay more gas, a higher fee, to push me in the front of the line and have my transactions become accepted. This would be too expensive for malicious spammers to try to do what I was talking about earlier and break the network. So how does EOS do this if they're not charging any transaction fees? How do they avoid spammers of coming into the network and just trying to crowd the blockchain and make it so no one else can use it?
Yeah, so I think this is where EOS's token model is pretty interesting and pretty different from what has been seen. So if you look at the EOS token, it'll proportionally represent your access to the network. So if you own 1% of the tokens, you'd own 1% of the bandwidth, you'd own 1% of the storage, 1% of whatever resources that EOS will offer in the future. So that's how they're able to have, zero transaction fees. So for example, no one is going to own, or no one will need to own like a significant portion. You could always just rent it. So if I was a just individual, I could, maybe have the amount of EOS tokens that I need for the resources that I consumed on either a weekly, monthly, or yearly basis. Or if you're a DApp, a decentralized app, then you could, hold a certain amount of EOS so that you could use the amount of resources that you need, but you could also rent more if you needed to. So it's really interesting in that sense.
So it sounds like it's almost like an Amazon Web Services where you can pay depending on how much you use. Is that similar? How much?
Yeah. I mean, because you can always rent more resource. So you can always rent, people's space. So say I had, 1,000 EOS tokens and I only use 500's worth of bandwidth or something like that, I could rent the other 500 to someone else who needed that storage capability or that bandwidth capability or, whatever it would be.
And is that granted just immediately? Because as in Ethereum's case, say they had CryptoKitties, the huge decent DApp that literally shut down Ethereum, and it really showed that Ethereum can't handle these big scalable dApps. So in CryptoKitties' case, if it was on EOS, could they just say, okay, we need to buy more and more storage and more space so that we can scale this really quickly?
Yeah, I mean, so that I guess theoretically could work. We'll find out if it works in practice. Yeah, Ethereum doesn't scale right now, but it's also working on, Plasma. It's working on sharding, state channels, which are all different, layer 2 technology that could really enhance its scaling capabilities. And if those end up playing out, then that would be awesome. And I think there's probably a strong probability that they find some sort of scale. It'll just depend on the level of scale because, EOS is more centralized in the sense that the block producers are already defined. So it's going to be able to, be a faster network. You're going to have, lower latency. You're going to have faster finality, which is basically like finalizing an actual transaction. And so the scaling might not be comparable but we'll see what happens with Ethereum.
Yeah, because I think right now Ethereum's about 15 transactions per second, and I think EOS claims to be about around 100,000. And does EOS even, are they trying to expand that to millions?
So yeah, so right now 100,000 is probably pretty unrealistic. I think that based on the technology that and then what I've read, they'll probably be able to have around, you know, somewhere between 1 to 6,000 transactions
Okay.
per second. So
Okay.
we'll see what happens when they do their initial rollout in June. And I know that they said they are going to roll things out slowly. So it'll be likely that they do some sort of upgrades, you know, to the network, because I think they really want to battle test it. Delegated proof of stake it hasn't really been tested other than in Dan Lammer's previous projects, which are Steem and BitShares. But even this delegated proof of stake system is a little different. So they really do need to see it in practice in order to make the best, you know, adaptions that they'll need to create the best scalability. And Ethereum's going to have those issues too, because they're transitioning to a proof of stake model. And, you know, they're going to have a hybrid proof of stake, proof of work until they can have some sort of fully adopted proof of stake model.
Yeah, and that seems to be the biggest problem when people talk about EOS. They're saying, well, it's a scam. I've heard that it's a scam just because there's nothing to actually show for it. They have a test net and that's it. While Ethereum is just so far ahead. They've learned a ton throughout their experience, obviously. They have the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance, which is absolutely massive. They have members like Microsoft, JP Morgan, BBVA, Intel, BP, Credit Suisse. Like I could keep going, but
Yeah.
the alliance and basically it's just used to define and create enterprise software based on Ethereum's blockchain and highly demanding applications at the speed of business. I think that's what they say. I wrote that down, but EOS has nothing.
Yeah.
Doesn't actually have.
Yeah. And that's true. At the end of the day, they are a test net right now. They are not a live product yet. And so, you know, them being valued at, you know, 17, 18 billion dollars or whatever they are at right now is a little crazy in some senses, because, you know, it's like if you were investing in, I don't know, Amazon back in the day and they had no product and, you know, just kind of more of an idea, and we're saying, okay, we're going to be worth this much in the future. That's a little different because obviously you have Dan Larimer, EOS, as, you know, proven that they're going to have, you know, the ability to probably execute. So I'm pretty optimistic about their ability to deliver. But, you know, and then they've also had a year-long ICO, which, you know, was beneficial in some ways. And then it also kind of just drew a lot of negative, you know, response from the whole community.
And from a regulation standpoint, I don't know if that year-long ICO has affects them at all, but with ICOs, that's been one of the greatest and problematic things with Ethereum, as it has created this whole new ecosphere where people can get all this funding and it's awesome, but there's also a ton of scams on there. So what does EOS's ICO platform look like?
You know, we don't know yet. It'll be interesting to see what they do. They've talked about doing a lot of different, you know, they've talked about implementing both ICOs, but also allowing for airdrops. So it'll be, you know, who knows? We'll have to see what they end up doing, how the platform ends up working out. There's a lot of points of, you know, ambiguity in their entire system. So you know, the main thing is we need to see how it plays out. So I'm excited for June because then it'll actually be live and there will be some data to back everything up.
Yeah, and from what I've read about it, I mean, throughout this year-long ICO, they got a ton of money. How much was it? Like 2 billion or something?
They've probably raised over $2 billion. And I mean, you have to remember that's, I'd have to look at the exact numbers, but they've been raising money in Ether. So as the price of Ether is, you know, skyrocketed since like June when they initially did their ICO, the war chest they have is going to be insane. And money doesn't solve all problems, but it definitely allows you to get the best talent. It allows you to solve all your money problems that startups would usually have. So we'll see what they end up doing with it.
And one of the things that I like though about that year-long ICO is that they've accumulated so much money and they're going through some venture capital companies. They're basically giving them millions of dollars and they're saying, find the best talent, find a project that we can build on the EOS platform or that we'll want to build. So it seems like they have a pretty good incentive with billions of dollars backing it. And is that one of the biggest aspects of EOS, is that they can bring in, like you just said, some of this talent and some of these projects that can really make a difference and bring in venture capitals too, because they can do the due diligence instead of all these scams happening like on Ethereum. Maybe they can give the money to venture capitalists who have done this all their lives. They can do their due diligence and say, okay, this is a company that is safe and has a real application and they're going to be building on EOS.
Yeah, I mean, the money won't be the really big thing. The big thing is the technology, obviously. And since it's open source, anyone will be able to launch an ICO if they end up having some equivalent ERC20 or EOS20 token. So I don't think that you'll necessarily stop seeing scams. It'll be interesting to see if people start wanting to do some sort of token launch on the EOS platform compared to the Ethereum platform. But I don't see that happening just because Ethereum has been battle tested in the sense that people know that they can release a ERC20 token and it's going to do what it's supposed to do. And there will need to be some time before people have that confidence and comfortability with doing that on EOS.
But there are some exchanges that have said that they're going to launch some EOS-based platforms, yep. A couple other things. What were they exactly?
I know one of them is, I think, Bitfinex, or they're going to call it like EOS Finex. And then you have, I don't know all the list, but you have a couple exchanges that are going to launch onto the EOS platform, the EOS blockchain. And they have contributed millions of dollars to funds, to corporations, to individual groups and just to the ecosystem in general. So we'll see if the money ends up helping spur growth. I think it'll help to a certain extent, but they'll also need just a good, strong community following. But I think EOS has a decent amount of that.
Okay, and one thing I would like to talk about is the leadership. We've been talking about Dan Larimer, and I kind of have a little bit of beef with Dan Larimer because he but at the same time, I'm kind of the same way because I'd like to, my goal in life is to become a serial entrepreneur. And that's what Dan Larimer does, is he starts a company, it does pretty well, and then he leaves. And so half of me respects that side of him, but I also don't like the idea of that he's going to just start EOS and then he's going to leave and after a couple months, maybe a year, and he's going to make something even better then. And from an Ethereum standpoint, I like Vitalik and I like how he's been awfully loyal and very, very committed to the project and just has become such a big player in the crypto space with a very valuable opinion. So what's your take on that, on Dan Larimer? I mean, obviously the guy's a genius, but do you think he'll stay and stick around and lead well?
I think both him and Vitalik are brilliant. I think they're excellent for the community and they've done a lot for the community. I think that Dan saw, he started with, Steemit and BitShares, and I think he just wanted to do something different. Steemit is widely successful. BitShares is successful too. So it's not like he really left them in ruins. He left them just to run their own and their open source projects. So I think it's always kind of strange when people really knock him for leaving, but then everyone, loves that Satoshi Nakamoto is not part of the project anymore. Yeah. So it's kind of like this paradox that if people know who you are, they don't like that you move, but if they don't know, then they like that you are not in control anymore. I think that he'll probably stay with EOS for a couple years. And then the parent company essentially is Block One. So I see him staying there, and he could decide to develop something on top of EOS or do some sort of other side project or get into funding other projects. But I see him staying involved in some way or form for the foreseeable future.
Awesome. And the closing question, do you think Ethereum and EOS can coexist? And then there's even more platforms out there like Neo and Cardano and Lisk. Do you think all these can coexist, or do you think it's going to be just a few that turn out to be the big players and everyone uses?
Yeah, I mean, that's the $1 million question, or really the $1 trillion question. Is it one chain to rule them all, or will you have, the ability to have, multiple chains? So you could say that there will be one chain, simple to the way that Google is the one predominant search internet, or you could say that, hey, it could be more similar to telephones where, you have Apple, but you also have Samsung, but you also have, all these other different niche players. I personally think that multiple chains can exist and that they will. I think they'll provide different things. So if you look at EOS and Ethereum, for instance, they'll provide different benefits. So maybe decentralized apps will want to be built on EOS more because it'll scale. They'll have, faster transactions, faster times, and that'll all transition into user interface and a smooth and seamless process for users. But maybe there will be some applications that are developed that need to be a little more decentralized, that need to be a little more censorship resistant, or that, have some other quality that another blockchain ends up providing. So I don't see a reason why you can't have multiple, but, only time will tell. I could be completely wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's all so early. And I think as time goes on, more and more blockchains and more projects are going to really understand what they're best at, and everyone will kind of go down their own road. So,
yeah, I mean, you never know. Like Ethereum and EOS could be like the Netscape
yeah,
and Firefox of our days. And, it's always impossible to forecast the future, but it's very exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. So with that said, thank you everyone for watching. That's a little breakdown between EOS and Ethereum. Make sure again to subscribe and like this video. We'll be putting out more videos. We also go live every Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. Central Time. So make sure to follow us there. Thank you all for watching.